All right, so I'm very pleased to be here today. I feel like a tiny little fish in a big intellectual pond. I'm actually from that small state at the bottom of Australia that you can barely see on the map there, Tasmania. And I'm here to present about the Australian comparative study of survey methods. Let's see if I can work this. All right, so in the spirit of my presentation, which does have a bit of an Australiana theme, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So they're the traditional custodians of the land where the Social Research Centre is and where I live and work. So that's that orange circle on the black and white map there. You'll notice that I've used the Life in Australia map throughout this presentation just to really drill it, bring it home. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and recognise that Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And you'll see Uluru from Central Australia there, lovely picture. I didn't take that one. I also have a number of study acknowledgements that I won't run through. Ben and Dina led the project from our team, statistician and methodologist there. And we had a number of SRC staff involved, but also external consultants, which was really important to us because, as you've already, I guess, sensed, this study was important to us. And if we don't perform so well, that's not great. But if we perform really well, then we need to be able to say that it wasn't just us making up the result. Also, thanks to the Australian Bureau of Statistics for their benchmarks that they provide and for their help with the video assisted live interviewing development. Oh, that's just a photo from my shack. I was there last week and that's the view. Anyway, yep, bit of the Australian context now for you. So, do you know what? We do let friends and family go. So, yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, I do feel like this is family, right? Yeah, so Australia, in terms of land mass, we are a very big country, but we're not necessarily all that populated. So despite being smaller than the US, just smaller than the US, sorry, in terms of land mass, we have just a tiny 300 million or so fewer residents. We also see a big concentration around the capital cities. So if you wanted to do some face-to-face interviewing in the capital cities, relatively cost effective. If you want to try and include anyone in other rest of state areas, very expensive. We're also driven by the same things that you are in terms of caddy prices just going up and quality concerns as well. A couple of differences for Australia. We don't actually have any geographical data that we can append to mobiles or to RDD mobiles. We do have a really high quality address-based sample frame that has great coverage and which can be appended, which can have census mesh block data appended to it. So ABS is a good option for us. And we can send text messages for research purposes as well, which is a bit of a bonus and something we're experimenting with, as you see. Nick's told you all about the trust context in Australia, pretty low levels of trust at the moment. And ABS has recently released a report showing that people are reporting having received twice as many scam texts in the last year. And also more scam emails and phone calls and so on. All right, so very quickly, I'll run you through some context. Before we built Life in Australia, that's right, we built Life in Australia. Sounds fun to say that. We actually did a very similar study. So we did the online panels benchmarking study in 2015. That included an ABS arm, 2 caddy arms, one with recruitment off the back of another study. And through both of these studies, we have wanted to test how some of the main methods are comparing, particularly probability-based and non-probability-based. And we actually wanted to see if conditions were okay for a non-probability panel in Australia, and yay, they were. So we built a panel. And now, or in December last year when we did the study, what we wanted to do was see, can we actually stand by our claims still, and how we're going compared to some of the non-probability panels out there. And that's from a holiday I went on in Queensland. That was the view from our hotel. It's pretty. It's Airlie Beach, and this is actually Whitehaven Beach, which is in the same area. That's on a bad day. Yeah. Okay, so what we did was we compared 5 survey methods for general population surveys. We used both contemporary and emerging methods, which I'll show you shortly: probability and non-probability, interviewer administered, and self-completion, with the aim of exploring the price and credibility gap. So it's this credibility issue that we're quite worried about. We can also look at the relative price differences. So the methods that we used or tested in the study, Life in Australia being our probability-based panel, we ran the survey on there. We use online and we have an offline component which is conducted via Caddy. We have a whole heap of recruitment frames that we use for our panel. Originally it was Caddy dual frame RDD, then mobile RDD, ABS, SMS push to web has been used. Yeah. So a range of recruitment methods, all probability based. We used computer assisted telephone interviewing. So Caddy, which is a real challenge for us at the moment, response rates, cost. 4 non-probability panels. And we also did a video assisted live interviewing arm. And I mentioned that the Australian Bureau of Statistics, who does our census, they've been experimenting with this method. So they worked with us on the methodology and training our interviewers and so on. And we did an SMS push to web arm. Now, I'm only presenting the results today of the probability-based online panel, Caddy as a comparison, and the non-prob panels. At APOR, we'll tell you more about the Varley arm and SMS push to web because we haven't analysed it yet. Oh, look at that cute little boy. He's that's my son, and that's on a recent holiday actually in Victoria, Great Ocean Road, if you're ever interested. Yes, correct. Right, so what did we see in terms of the sample profile for each of the arms? So we're looking at unweighted data here. You can see that Caddy, Life in Australia, further away from benchmarks in terms of the key demographics there. And the panels, you see them getting a bit closer to the benchmarks. Not surprising, they applied quotas. So it's influenced by that sampling approach. For doing the actual bias assessment itself, the main considerations for us in selecting items was making sure that we had high quality benchmarks available. So we use our census data. We excluded any weighting variables, so the types of things on the previous slide, and just use secondary demographics, and we also looked at substantive measures. We excluded any highly correlated variables and components of a scale, so things like the Kessler-6 items, we used the overall score. And we used the same weighting scheme across all arms. All right, so secondary demos. I've included this level of detail here just to show you the number of demos that we looked at. We're looking here at the distance from the benchmarks. So obviously higher scores are further from the benchmarks. And what we can see is that Life in Australia, thank goodness, has performed well in terms of difference from benchmarks. And Caddy also not too far off, apart from this weird home ownership one, which I'm having a look at. And you can see panel 1, despite having previously looked fairly close to the unweighted benchmarks for the other demos, is actually performing a bit worse in terms of bias here. So on average, each of these secondary demos comes out looking like this. So the two probability-based methods, Life in Australia and CADI, performed pretty well in terms of average distance from benchmarks. Panel 3 also performed pretty well there. And having said that, panel 1 is, not as reliable in terms of getting close to the benchmark. So there's a lot of variation across those non-prob panels, but we're seeing the quality improve for those who do it well. I haven't gone through the breakdown for all of the substantive variables. I just wanted to show you the type of variables we used. We had a heap of health indicators, some lifestyle, and so on. And the averages for the substantive measures came out looking a little bit like this. So probability-based, getting closer. Panel 1, again, why would you ever use them? But the other panels as well, not that far off, really. So, and I guess what I want to say about that is, while we haven't finalised the analysis of this yet, compared to the online panels benchmarking study we did in 2015, there's a lot less distance. The gap has narrowed between the non-probability panels quality, most of them, and our probability-based methods. So overall, when you include the substantive and secondary demos, this is what it ended up looking like. Life in Australia and CADI performing well. The shading there's incorrect, but panel 3 also pretty close behind. Now, the difficulty is you don't know which panel you're going with when you go with these non-prob panels. So the quality isn't always evident before you've collected the data, but that's where it's looking in terms of those average bias. We also looked at the relative price difference. So I don't think it's, and I should mention that we use Life in Australia as the starting point and the others are ratios. So CADI, in terms of direct costs, was 4 times more expensive than Life in Australia, but the non-probability panels were either half the price or right down to panel 4, where you could do 5 of them for the same price. So you can see one of the dilemmas for our clients is that it's a lot cheaper, and if the quality gap truly is closing, then we just really need to reinforce the benefits of the robustness of our approach and the fact that it withstands some of the other factors that you see in the non-prob panels. So this really crude diagram just shows sort of where we're at in terms of the measures. So highest cost being for CADI, biggest bias being for panel 1, which performed poorly. But, Life in Australia being not too bad in terms of bias, and certainly compared to the non-prob panels, it's much more reliable. What we saw for the non-probability based panels was that a better sample profile doesn't necessarily translate to less biased estimates, which is, I think, not surprising for any of you here. And that there was a lot of difference across them. So we have a heap more analysis to do. So that was just an initial take. We will be attending APOR. We also will be at Ezra. There's going to be a lot more on the video assisted live interviewing if anyone's interested in that. SMS push to web I know is not as relevant for this audience, but some might be interested. And the Statistical Society conference as well, where you can talk to the people who are a lot more intelligent than me and can tell you all about the sampling and weighting methodologies and so on. Oops, I've gone back. Melbourne.